My name is Calo. I was born in Iron Mountain, Kingsford specifically, area of Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula. And I grew up there. I went down to school at Michigan State, where I majored in political science and graduated from. After school, I worked for a state legislator, Representative David Anthony, who was the state representative up in the 108th district, which is the Upper Peninsula, Delta, Dickinson, and Menominee counties. And I ran 3 of his campaigns during college and after college. And then shortly after that, I worked in his legislative office in Lansing. I worked for 2 years during his last term before he was term limited. And then at that time, I decided to make a career change, I guess, if you will, and I went back to school and got my teaching certificate. And I taught high school history and government for 5 years in the Greenville Public Schools. Greenville, a little bit north of Grand Rapids. And I loved it there. I loved teaching. At the time, my wife and I, who now we've been married 18 years, my wife Liz, but at the time we were starting our family, and we had our first daughter. And my wife, who was also a public school teacher in Ionia, she wanted to stay at home and take care of our kids. Our one kid at the time, and any subsequent kids we were blessed with. And so at that time I started looking for other employment. And I was hired by Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, who I work for now. And I've been working for them for 9 years. And we've lived in northern Michigan, in Gaylord, for 2 years now. And we absolutely love it. The people are great, the area is great, and we couldn't be happier. That's kind of the bio on me. I can tell you, why I'm running. I don't know if you want me to include that.
Well, I think we'll get to that too as we go through this.
Sure.
We've got to start off with somewhat of a general question that, as you're campaigning, as you're going through the district and talking to voters, what do you identify as the number one issue facing residents in the district?
There's a lot of problems out there, I'll be honest with you. Michigan has a lot of issues that need to be worked on. Me personally, education is huge for me. As a former public school teacher, as a man with 2 daughters in Gaylord Public Schools, I end up having a lot of conversations with voters on the state of our public school system. The fact that a lot of tax money goes to charter schools that are unaccounted for. I know the Free Press did a big expose a little while back on how a lot of waste and abuse and fraud is taking place in some of these charter schools. So that really hits home to me, again, as a former school teacher and as a father of 2 girls who attend public schools. So I really want to work hard to restore funding cuts to public education. That's a big issue for me. What other issues do voters talk about? Roads and infrastructure, obviously. We used to always say Michigan roads for a long time, but after 2 weeks ago, the flooding in Detroit, I think it's more appropriate that we talk about roads and infrastructure, because they're in need of repair all throughout the state.
Well, and let's start there.
Sure.
What's your plan to, I'm assuming you're saying we need more funding.
Sure.
to be dedicated to roads.
Absolutely we do, and I'll be honest with you, I do not have the silver bullet. I don't have the plan that says, okay, here's how we're going to fund it, but I have set out 4 prerequisites, if you will, on plans I will or will not support. There's a lot of plans out there. But number 1, and the governor's plan is a good example of this. He wants to divert, he wants to change the, wholesale fuel tax and use that money to appropriate for roads. In doing that, money would be lost to public education, to the school aid fund. And that's my first prerequisite, is any plan that takes money out of the school aid fund is a non-starter for me. I can't support that. In fact, I want to put more money back into that, not take more money out. So that's the first prerequisite, I guess, if you will. The second is that I will not support any regressive taxes. And in my estimation, that's what we've seen in the last 4 years under the Republican legislature, the Republican governor, is a lot of regressive taxes that really penalize the working poor and the middle class. And any tax hike on those folks in particular, I would not support. The third thing is I would be totally transparent. I'm coming up and telling you I don't have the silver bullet. There are some plans out there that I would look at, but whatever I support, I'm going to come out and share with people and tell people why I support it. And that's one of the things I'm doing is I'm knocking on doors, is asking people's opinions. I want their opinions, the citizens of the 105th. The fourth thing that I've kind of set out about road funding or road repair is I would not support any plan like some have discussed where we sell some of state land and use that money to repair roads, because in my estimation you're saying, let's sell that acre of state land to patch that pothole. To me, that's not a renewing fund, and that's whatever we come up with has to be a renewing fund. It has to be a fund where next year and the year after and the year after we have the funds to do exactly what we're talking about. So those are kind of four things I've set out, but to be honest with you, there are plans out there. Representative Deonda up in the Upper Peninsula, he has a plan to offer an early retirement program to MDOT and to let those positions, through attrition, let those positions remain closed, and then use that funding for road repairs and infrastructure. That's one plan. There's other plans about raising the corporate income tax from 6% to 8%. That right there would get you $300 million. So, I think there are plans out there, and I would be willing to look at a lot of different ones.
Are there any other plans that you will look at? Because the two plans you point out, we're looking at billions of dollars of road fixing, and you're only talking about something that could bring in maybe a couple $100 million at the most, if it passes through. And I've heard all about the plans that you don't like.
Yeah.
But what other plans do you?
Well, for instance, the candidate Mark Schauer running for governor, he's discussed that just through loopholes, just through business loopholes, we can gain another $300 million in 1 year, because there are lots of business loopholes out there that can be closed. Money that we're wasting on different corporate income, the corporate income tax, that was one example. But there are examples out there. Do I have the equation to come up with 1.2 million, which is what was originally said was needed, and is probably, 1.2 billion, which is originally said what was needed, and it's probably going to be more than that. I don't have the exact mix of what I would support. But like I said, I would be upfront with people and transparent and say, this is what I support, why I support, beyond that, a real close look has to be taken of all our tax structure, and where we're taxing and where we're not taxing, where we need to maybe adjust that. So beyond that, I wouldn't say. Like I said many times right now, I don't have a silver bullet. I don't know exactly, but I do know what I would and wouldn't support.
And we'll be jumping around a little bit on topics,
That's fine.
and again, these guys will jump in whenever they've got anything. To what extent should the state be focusing on development of alternative energy sources? And what action should the state legislature take in driving that emphasis?
I am a strong proponent of coming up with alternative energy sources. I know there are currently regulations as to, we want to come up with a certain percentage by a certain date, date certain time out in the future, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whatever the means are. I think it's imperative that we come up with that, because again, we're right now the means of energy that we're so focused on are finite, and it's important that we find renewable energy in all forms. As far as what I would support, I would just have to take a look at plan by plan. Like I said, there's already been legislation passed that's required a certain percentage come from renewable energy sources, and that figure is bound to go up in the future, but by how much and how soon, I don't really know.
You mentioned Mark Schauer before. His plan is to go to mandate 30% by 2035. Is that something, does that go far enough in your mind? Would you do less or more?
I think that's reasonable. Again, you're setting a date far enough in advance that there's a lot of time to get that done. I think that's a pretty reasonable plan. 11 years down the road to get to 30%, I don't think that's asking too much.
Do you think there's any renewable energy which has more potential than others?
Obviously, I just drove to Lansing last weekend, and you drive through St. John's area and you see huge wind farms and huge turbines, and I definitely think there's a future in more of that. I'm not an expert on it, and I can't tell you the exact specifics on where and when some of these wind farms should be created. But I do think renewable energy is something we really need to get involved in sooner rather than later.
Would you or would you not be in support of wind farms offshore?
I would be very careful with that. For the reasons that have already been stated, and the beautification or the de-beautification, I guess, of our shorelines. I would be very careful with that. I may not. It just kind of depends on specific plans, but I would tread lightly on that.
Okay. What role should state government play in growing the economy and job creation?
Well, I think there's a big role that can be played by state government and state legislators. For instance, myself, just recently I toured the University Center in Gaylord, where I live, and the M-Tech program that's going on there. I think those are great examples of, producing not only the qualified candidates that it's going to take to grow the economy, but it attracts businesses, and so that's what we want to do ultimately. We want to attract business to the state, and specifically for me, to the 105th district. So what do we need to do that? We need strong schools, strong roads and infrastructure, and a strong job market. This job market is not strong. Our schools are being weakened by our legislature currently, and it's making that task of bringing quality jobs a lot more difficult to the 105th district. So those are things that are on my priority list to be certain.
Did you support Proposal 1?
I didn't, and I'll be honest with you. It was, there's a few reasons why I didn't support it. One example is any proposal that's written the way that it was, to me, there's a reason why it was so convoluted in the way it was written. I've never seen a ballot proposal anywhere who said, you know, if we pass this proposal, it'll benefit this group and this group and this group. That some people have called that unconstitutional. That might be, but it was a very convoluted proposal. And then, you know, it was asking for a lot of trust. The governor and the people who supported the ballot proposal were saying, you know, trust us. We will have the money to give to townships and revenue sharing and that kind of thing. And I'm sorry, it's just it's too much of a gamble to say trust us. You know, I understand why there was such a emphasis on passing it, and the proponents of it spent millions and millions of dollars to put forth the effort that they did. But again, to me, it's too much of a gamble. It's too much of saying, well, the money will be there, you know, and then if you have to take $500 million out of the general fund to do that, again, now we're flirting with taking money out of the state aid fund. And again, anything that takes money out of that fund is a non-starter for me.
What would you do in your first 90 days in order to, or attempt to do at least in the first 90 days in order to stimulate job creation in the economy in northern Michigan?
Well, again, and I go back to this, the way to get strong job creation in northern Michigan is to have a strong base for it. And by that I mean strong schools, strong education sources. Again, one of my top priorities is public education, and my first goal would be to go to Lansing to work on this currently broken system, to renew funding to public education that's just been stripped from it over the last 4 years. If we start building stronger schools, we're going to start building stronger students, and again, with you know, a better tax base, we're going to have more businesses want to move to northern Michigan. So I think it all kind of revolves back to that strong education.
Should the state contribute in any form to a bailout for Detroit? Why or why not? What did you think of the...
I was supportive of it, and I'll tell you why. From knocking doors, from talking to citizens, they thought really the same that I thought, which is a strong Detroit equates to a strong Michigan, and vice versa. If you have a strong Detroit, obviously, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. A strong every town, every city in Michigan makes for a stronger Michigan, but especially Detroit. And then to see pensioners, you know, go and vote against their own personal will to say, you know, let's chip in, even if it means deep cuts to our benefits, let's be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I applauded them for doing that, and I was supportive of that plan.
In many cases, school districts in northern Michigan receive fewer dollars per pupil than those in the southern part of the state. What can be done to level the field in the future?
Well, I think it's a big job. It's going to take a lot of things. You know, something that really sticks in my craw, I guess, if you will, is the charter school system. I think that has to be changed. And again, from day one in office, that's going to be one of my goals. There are laws in other states where there are charter type schools that say, you know, if you get 20% of your funding from the state, you have to be absolutely transparent. You have to have open meetings. You have to account for every dollar where it goes. And that's not taking place in Michigan. So that's one thing I want to do right there. You know, it's imperative that we renew that funding, that $400 per pupil, or whatever the figure is at this point. it's imperative that we even the playing field. You know, the whole reason for Proposal A back 20 years ago when I was working in the state legislature was the argument was this will really level the playing field for Michigan schools. And as you just mentioned, they're more unlevel than ever. And that really has to be worked on, and that's something I want to roll my sleeves up and get to work on in Lansing.
So how? How do you level the field?
How to get more money into the school system?
Yeah, how do you level the field? I mean, we talked all about charter schools, but that's not going to
Well,
help level.
Absolutely. If you start closing down the charter schools that are in question and having problems, and over 30% of our charter schools aren't even performing up to standards, and you know
But you've got charter schools within your own district that are doing just fine. But even before charter schools, there's a big discrepancy in the amount of money school districts get in the state of Michigan.
Right.
For example, there are school districts in suburban Detroit area which are getting double and triple the amount of money that the school districts in northern Michigan are getting. How can you level that playing field? You're not going to do it just by charter schools.
No, you're not going to do it just by charter schools, but that's one of the issues, you know. But you're right, that all has to be looked at and taken into account. You know, I look at just the fact that the money in the state aid fund should be hands-off. It should have been hands-off forever. It's not. Whenever the governor or the state legislature needs something for another program, it seems like they dip their paws into it. And you can go back to John Engler with the state retirees, public school employees retirement system, and dipping in there and taking money out to this governor currently. You know, going in there, taking money from the general fund, which normally was earmarked right for the state aid fund in schools. You know, we're stealing money we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, I guess. We're stealing money from this source to use on this source. That has to change immediately, and there just has to be a real accounting of who's getting what money. I think once you have all the figures on the table, once we know what the charter schools are getting and how they're spending it, you know, that's going to make a difference right there. That's gonna at least open the eyes of some people, and then you can get a more equal accounting of who gets what. Is it ever gonna be a point where Bloomfield public schools get the same as Gaylord public schools? Probably not, but it can be a lot closer. Like you said, there's schools down there getting double per pupil, and that's just not right. That's not equity. That's what we need to work on, is have some equity.
Proposal A, has it been a success or a failure?
I think it's been a failure, and again, the reason why I worked for a state legislature who was seriously opposed to it back when it passed. You know, again, the whole argument was this is going to level the playing field for schools, and like you just pointed out in the last question, they're anything but level. There's some real discrepancies, and I think that needs to be looked at and changed. Now that being said, Proposal A was passed by the public, and typically if the public passes something, we got to find a way to make it work, is what I think. Because the voice of the public, there's no more direct democracy than that.
Would you be in favor of consolidation of school districts, or do you think the school districts that we have currently should stay in place?
Well, I'm not in favor of that, just in the fact of what it's going to mean to the the school as a whole, the teachers, the support staff, that kind of thing. Right now, with reduced funding going to our public schools, It's mean the laying off of teachers, and consolidation obviously would mean more of that. It would mean bigger class sizes. It would mean, you know, you go down the list of what reduced money to per pupil to schools means, and it means for me, my daughter's getting ready to go back to 5th grade, and it's a longer list every year of school supplies, and it's, you know, more that the parents have to supply because the school can't afford to supply it, and it's older textbooks, and I mean, the list just goes on and on. So I would typically be against that. Again, the specific financial situation involved would have to be, you know, considered.
What do you get a school district that has 20 students in it? Wouldn't it make sense to consolidate that with a larger school district in order to save the state?
And that's why I say, in certain cases, it would really have to be looked at in what this means financially to the school, what it means financially to the employees, all of that. In that particular case, yeah, I mean, that's something that I would seriously consider supporting, but it would really have to be a case-by-case basis, I think.
Staying on education, should the state adopt the Common Core state standards for education and the test that comes with it?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you why. As a former public school teacher, when I was teaching, and this is 10 years ago almost, every year we had Michigan benchmarks. These were benchmarks given to us to say students should learn this concept by the time they exit your class in the spring. And, you know, or by the time they go on to the next grade, they should know this concept, this concept, this concept. All it is benchmarks. All it is examples of what you want to teach. Now, my opponent, other Republicans have made Common Core the boogeyman. They've made it a scare tactic. They've said, well, this is what Obama says we have to teach. President Obama says we have to teach these to our students, and this is how we have to teach it. That's not true. It's just simply not true. They are simply benchmarks, and the test that goes along with it, the teachers in Michigan have been preparing their students with those concepts for that test for a while now, and now the state legislature wants to pull the rug from under them right at the last minute, and I don't think that's right.
But there are a lot of teachers who are saying that the Common Core standards are put in place without a lot of pre-planning, and that the schools were ill-prepared to even put those in place. This is from school districts from across the United States. What do you say to those teachers?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by weren't prepared?
The test wasn't even in place yet. They didn't
Right.
have the test together. They didn't have the actual standards together. The teachers weren't even aware of what the standards were. They weren't even given classes on how to instruct to the Common Core standards. It was just kind of said, here's what we're doing, do it.
You know, I question that, and I know in the state of Michigan, there has been ample time, in my estimation, from what I've heard from teachers in the school district, to prepare for this. You know, I think, again, since it's not, it's a benchmark system, and if that's the case, I think teachers can look at it and look at their lesson. You know, I'm just going back to when I was a teacher. Look at the benchmarks, look at their lesson plan, figure out maybe a different way to teach this concept or that concept that might hit on that benchmark a little more. I think teachers are qualified enough to do that, that they can adjust, if you will. I had to adjust on the fly all the time when I was teaching, and I think teachers are pretty good with that.
One of the concerns people have with Common Core is that it's going to cause more teachers to teach to the test, which in a lot of teaching circles is considered a bad thing to do. What would you have to say to those kind of opponents?
Again, 10 years ago when I was teaching, there was accusations, oh, that's all the meat is. You're just teaching to the meat, you're just teaching to the test. You know, standardized tests have their place.
Another one of the concerns about Common Core is that it will take away local control from of the schools, from the school boards. What do you say to people who bring up that one?
Again, I just go back to my original statement, which is, this is a list of benchmarks and concepts which need to be taught to students so they can be successful in the job market after school. And again, I'm supportive of that. I don't really, I don't buy into that it's just, you know, again, such a mandate. It's not a situation where it's, okay, your students have to know, you know, a certain percentage of your students have to pass this portion of the Common Core test, or disciplinary actions happen. You know, it's not at that point. It's a simple list of benchmarks that need to be followed.
I see. Kind of staying on this education subject, one of the things that I hear a lot of concerns about, and in relation somewhat to Common Core, kind of not as well, has to do with how do we deal with good teachers and how do we deal with bad teachers. What do you think needs to be done in order to ensure that our students in all of our districts have got good teachers, and what needs to be done to get rid of the bad ones?
The sad fact is there are some poor teachers out there. Now, I know overwhelming majority of teachers are dedicated. There's a reason they go into teaching. It's because they love students, they love educating students. You don't go in it for the money, that's for sure. You don't go in it to retire with large bonuses and benefits. You go in it because it's in your heart. And I'm a product of teachers. My grandparents were teachers. My parents were teachers. My father taught 35 years in a Kingsford High School up in the UP. So, you know, I see teachers, dedicated, hardworking teachers. Now, does a small portion of teachers, is that the case, that they need to be, whether it is disciplined, whether it is rooted out and, you know, sent along the way? Yeah, that's the case. And again, here's another example where I don't have the silver bullet, but I would consider looking at whatever proposals are out there as far as you know, retesting teachers and looking at their qualifications after each year, each couple years, that kind of thing. But I think that's the overwhelming minority of teachers who are just you know, in there for the wrong reasons, or in there because that's all they can do.
Would you support legislation that amends the state's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I've heard all the arguments for, all the arguments against, and it just is the right thing to do. Again, you know, if you run for a position like this, like I am, you have to just have some common beliefs, a common value system. And equity it doesn't get much more common of a strong value than equity. And it should be part of the Elliott Larson, because folks should not be subject to scrutiny for whatever their personal differences are.
Minimum wage. The state's the legislature increased the state's minimum wage from $7.40 to $9.25 earlier this year. Would you support further increases? Did the legislature go too far, not far enough? What's your position there?
You know, I do like that the legislature kept the indexing in future years of that portion in the legislation. I don't like that the public kind of got it stripped away from them. There was a lot of discussion about these being a ballot proposal. Again, I go back to when the public can decide some of these issues. Sometimes it's best because that's true democracy.
Concern has been raised recently about the safety of the twin pipeline that runs through the Straits of Mackinac. Is the legislature doing enough to ensure the safety of the Great Lakes, or?
No, and I work very closely with Phil Belfie, who you'll probably call in
Sure.
and ask him questions, and he's an environmental whiz. He's a PhD. You know, he understands these issues a lot more than I do, so he's kind of educated me on some of these. And no, the pipeline under the straits is not sufficient, and the company's attempts to make it sufficient are insufficient. And stringent regulations need to be put on that particular pipeline.
Do you support forcing Enbridge to replace it in whole?
Yes, in fact, the big push was double wall or not at all. Absolutely. Again, are we going to cut our nose off to spite our face? Are we going to look at a financial gain in one sense and at the possibility of polluting Lake Michigan or Lake Superior, or that's, to me, that's not even that's a no-brainer, I guess.
And I got one more, and I don't know if anybody else is okay. And this goes along. I know it was asked about, in your first 90 days, what would you do to spur job creation? But any issue we haven't asked you about, or anything that you're passionate about, legislation that you would push in your first year if you were elected.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned job creation, and I've been doing a lot of study on previous job creation in Otsego County and in the 105th District. And, the information I found was interesting in that in 2005, before I had moved to the area, Georgia Pacific was a thriving plant in Gaylord. 210 workers, the largest producer of particle board east of the Mississippi River, and that's the kind of business that we need to attract. Now, what happened in 2005 is the Koch brothers of Wichita, Kansas, purchased Georgia Pacific. 4 months after they purchased that, they shut down 2 plants, one in Maine with 400 workers and one in Gaylord with the 210 workers. It was devastating on the area. And these same Koch brothers are now supporting my opponent and sending out mailers with his name and his picture on it and saying why the 105th District needs to elect him. That to me is outrageous, that these people who caused heartache would want to play a role in our politics. So that's the opposite of job creation. But that's exactly the type of business that we need up in northern Michigan. I mean, the particle board, again, that was just appalling to me that plant, which brought a lot of jobs and products to northern Michigan, was abruptly closed down like that.
Sure.
And I would look at veneering plants, other paper product plants, and again, beyond that, like I said, the MTech program in Gaylord is a perfect example of training employees so that they can stay right there in the area and take good, qualified, skilled labor positions that are created right in that area. So if you create a base where employers want to move their business, then that's gonna do exactly what you just mentioned.
What you're seeing a lot of what we need here. Well, what are you going to do in the first 90 days?
Again, I'll go back to the same thing. I'm going to work on creating a strong education in Michigan, public education, so that we make sure that we have the resources to prepare our students for whatever the next level is. If you start there, and then you create a strong road and infrastructure system, these are things that are going to attract businesses. You know, that's the best way to get employers to want to move their companies and their businesses to northern Michigan. So I think that right there is what it's going to take. It's going to take the surrounding issues to strengthen those surrounding issues, and you're going to strengthen that job base right in northern Michigan.
So if I hear you correctly, in your first 90 days, you're going to focus on education and infrastructure.
Yeah, I think you had it right. You know, infrastructure, again, I think that the legislature needs to focus on that as it is. Is that going to happen in the lame duck session? I think there's a good chance that something's going to get passed in the lame duck session looking specifically at roads and infrastructure. And again, what happened in Detroit 2 weeks ago, it should be nothing if not eye-opening to these legislators that, hey, we need to get serious about this and not just posture on it. But education, there's no doubt that education is my number one reason why I'm running, thing I want to focus on when I get into the legislature. So yeah, as far as that goes, that's going to be my main concern when I get to Lansing.
Do you or do you not support the wolf hunt in the Upper Peninsula?
You know, I would say I personally probably am non-supportive of it, but again, here's an example where the state legislature is going to say, well, we were going to have a ballot proposal, or the public did say this, but we're going to do this. And to me, that's absolutely undemocratic, and we need to go along with the public's wishes, and we need to give the public the option to vote on these kind of issues. And for the legislature to think it knows better than its citizens says a lot about the current legislature as it's made up. And we have too many people who think they know better than the general public of Michigan.
Are you in favor or not in favor of increasing protections on dune areas along the Great Lakes?
You know, again, going back to what I said, the 105th district is nothing if not a beautiful landscape and important for tourism. So again, when you're talking about something like dunes, you're talking about tourism, you're talking about the landscape. I would be all in support of doing whatever we can to protect those areas. Now, specifically what that means and how much of a cost we're talking, you know, those things would have to be looked at closely. But in general, am I supportive of conservation and keeping our environment beautiful and attracting tourism? Absolutely.
Are you in favor of sustainable development policies?
Specifically, as far as?
Policies which would allow for developments such as higher, that's what I'm looking for here. Walkable communities and higher density communities.
Yeah, I mean, again, something that really would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But anything that, you know, again, I guess that's all I can say really is it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, if it was something in the 105th district, that would be a positive, regardless of cost. If it's going to be something that's going to strengthen the 105th district or options for people who live in the 105th district, you know, that's something I would be apt to support.
Are you for or against a proposal which was actually passed that would allow communications companies to no longer provide landline service in the state of Michigan?
You know, I haven't heard that one before. I haven't been asked that question. I think it would have to be studied. I think if you just look at the 105th district, landlines are still important. Maybe not to 40-something-year-olds like myself and my wife, but yet they do play an important role for many of the seniors in the 105th district. So I would not, I would be very careful about supporting anything that would take away options for those citizens.
Would you or would you not be in favor of proposals that would allow local governments to post meeting notices and other public notices on their websites rather than other locations?
I would be in favor of that.
Why?
Again, you know, like I said, there are a lot of seniors in the 105th district, but I think we're moving into an area where computers are pretty ubiquitous as far as being able to post those things. If it means a savings of money, again, we as a state have done a horrible job of getting the appropriate funding to townships, cities, and towns. If it means a savings of funding for them, then by all means, let's look at it.
Won't that hurt transparency?
Again, as I said, I think computers are pretty ubiquitous to the point where I don't think it would mean that much of a difference. Now, the fact is, even if you post on websites and that kind of thing, in our rural communities, most likely these postings are still going to be made in the newspapers, and a lot of seniors will get their news from those sources anyways. So I don't think it's hurting transparency in that way.
But if you allow them to just post on their website, what's to stop a local government from just saying, we're just going to post on our website, we're not going to post it in newspapers or on our doors or anything like that anymore?
That's a possibility, obviously. I would have to look at the issue more. I hadn't really been approached on this issue, so obviously transparency is important to me. As I said back when we were discussing roads, it's very important that citizens know how their legislators and how their local government operates and how they think. So, you know, that's something I would probably have to look closer at.
Would you support proposals that would strengthen the punishment for violations of the Freedom of Information Act and Open Meetings Act on public officials?
Strengthen the punishment for violations of the Information Act.
Yes.
You know, I am in full support of Freedom of Information Act, and again, this information should be available to the public. So would I strengthen punishment for those who violate that? I would seriously consider it. I don't, you know, again, it really just depends on the specifics of the plan, but that's something I would tend to think I would support.
What do you think about the rule that allows the legislature, take for example the wolf hunt and various other issues coming forward, where citizens will get together a petition, they'll get together a certain amount of signatures on the petition, they'll hand them to the legislature, and the legislature can decide whether or not to send it to a ballot or to vote it in the law, and it goes in the law without the governor's signature. What are your feelings on that?
I think in some of my answers I referred to that. That is absolutely anti-democratic. That is the legislators thinking they know more than the people who are legislated to, or the Michiganders of the 105th or whatever district. And I would be against anything like that. I would be in support of any legislation that says that the legislature can't preempt or step in front of a ballot proposal such as those.
Okay. And my last question, there might be others from others at the table here, is you've been a resident of the 105th for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to run for office, and what makes you qualified as a resident for 2 years?
Well, that's a terrific question. A lot of people have asked me that. First of all, I think no one would agree to give up, and I've given up the last 11 or 12 months of my life, No one would agree to give that up, to go out there, to meet folks, to campaign hard, to work hard for a position like this, unless they felt they were the best qualified for the position. If you look at my history, I worked in the state legislature, I stood in front of public schools as a public school teacher, and now I work in the private sector as a healthcare representative. I think all of these things mix together to make me a very qualified candidate. Now that being said, when I told my wife that I was going to run for this position, I think she was the least surprised of anybody, because she knew I always had it in my heart since 20 years ago when I worked in the state legislature to run for a position like this, because I think there's nothing more honorable than someone stepping up and saying, I want to help with the solutions to our many problems. So there's that aspect. The other aspect is I've seen a lot lately of a lot of people running for state government who don't even like government. They want to run and they want to get in and be a protest vote. And to me, that's not leadership. Leadership is running for a reason, for values and ideals that you bring to the table, and those kind of things. As far as being back in northern Michigan for 2 years, again, I spent a majority of my life in the Upper Peninsula. I've lived downstate near Lansing. I've lived near Grand Rapids. But, you know, I think I have a real good idea of not just Michigan, but northern Michigan. Are there differences between the UP and the northern Lower Peninsula? Yeah, there are, but not a whole lot. The people are the same. The people have the same values. The people have the same ethics and desires for their families. So I think I'm well prepared for that.
I lied, I got a couple more questions. What are your opinions on a part-time legislature?
I'm absolutely against it, and you know, there's been talk about it out there, and oh well, Michigan's one of the only full-time legislatures and all of that. You know, there's first of all, with term limits, to be in for a maximum of 6 years in each house, or 8 years in the Senate, but 6 years in the House, that's not a whole lot of time to get a lot done. Some might say, well, 6 years, that is a lot of time, but really it's not. By the time you build up the kind of cachet that someone needs to be a strong, important legislator who's making a difference, that doesn't give you a lot of time. But more concerning to me in a part-time legislature is who are we going to have running for a part-time legislature? Because you look at the system. Okay, if you're talking 2 or 3 months out of the year, let's say January, February, March, I know my employer wouldn't say, hey, you know, go take off for January, February, March. I don't know which employers would unless someone is self-employed, and that reduces the pool of qualified candidates. The second thing, though, and the more important thing, is you're going to have situations where corporations and companies say, okay, yeah, we want to prepare you for doing this, so we're going to run your campaign for you. We're going to get together enough money to put together a solid campaign for you, and you'll be, instead of being the representative from Saginaw, you'll be the representative from Dow Chemical or you know, any of the industries who could afford to do that. You'd see a very different mix of legislators, and I think it would be dangerous.
What about the elimination of one of the, either the House or the Senate?
Unicameral legislature. Again, I just think for all the issues we have in Michigan, for all the problems we have in Michigan, I don't think the current makeup of our legislature, the way it's designed, I guess, is a problem. I think possibly the legislators and some of their ideas and tactics are the problem. I don't think the design of our legislature is the problem.
Well, now is my last question. Name for me 3 unique aspects of the 105th.
Well, one, it's big. It's funny, I was down at the state convention last weekend, and, I'm talking to some of these legislators in the 5th and the 6th and the 20th, these districts, which are, 6 city blocks long, or this little portion of this township. And the 105th is 5 counties big, so it's large, and it's a lot of driving, but that's fine, because I'm used to that. A second I would say is just its beauty. There's just so much in the form of natural resources, and I'll drive by something that I notice for the first time every time. I was in Elk Rapids for an event last night, and it's just a beautiful drive on the way back. The third, I would say, would be just the makeup of each county is different. You can't say that Charlevoix County is like Montmorency County. They're very different, even though they're part of that same 105th district. They're very different, but the people are the same. The people are just good, hardworking, strong, valued people, and that's why I want to represent them in the legislature.